All right, we are here to talk about testable questions and variables. So first we're just going to go through and define what a testable question is, and then we can look at some examples. So a testable question is one that you could conduct an investigation or an experiment to answer. So that means that your experiment, you would be changing one thing to see what the effect is on another thing. In a minute, we'll talk about what variables are. So testable questions lead to investigations. Non-testable questions end up, they're more like research questions. So you would go and do some research and maybe write a report about it. So that's not what we're talking about here. We want to be able to write questions that lead to investigations. So here we go. Is it a testable question? How do plants grow? So is this a question that would lead to an investigation, or is it a question that leads to research? And hopefully you agree with me that this is a non-testable question. How do plants grow? It's not something that we could test by changing one thing and observing results. But we can tweak this question to make it testable. So what if we instead asked, how does changing the amount of water affect plant growth? Okay, we could change water and we could measure differences in plant growth. You could ask, how does presence or absence of worms in the soil affect plant growth? And I'll just write this short, presence or absence of worms. Okay, so there are limitless possibilities, but you need to make the question more specific if you want it to be testable. All right, let's do another one. What makes something sink or float? Testable or not? So is this something we could easily investigate, or does it lead to a bigger research type project? It's not very specific again, so this is not testable. But of course, we could tweak it to make it testable. Lots of options. How about, does the size of a piece of metal affect if something floats or not? Does the density of a piece of metal, does the shape of a piece of metal? Again, we could go on and on. There are lots of ways to tweak the question to make it testable. Okay. So we said that testable questions are always about changing one thing to see what the effect is on another thing, and those things are variables. So we're going to define two types of variables, independent and dependent. So simply, an independent variable in a testable question is the thing that you change. And when you change that thing, you measure the outcome. So the independent variable is what you change, and the dependent variable is the thing that you measure. Another way to say that is that the independent variable is the cause, and the dependent variable is the effect. A good way to remember this for experiment is independent variable starts with I, and I change the independent variable in an investigation. All right. And a dependent variable starts with D for data that you collect. Right. So whatever happens to the dependent variable in investigation is caused by the independent variable. So looking at a specific example here is a testable question. How does the amount of sunlight affect the growth of a plant? So what are the variables here? Well, we've got two things. We have amount of sunlight and we have the growth of the plant. So what depends on what? What are we changing? What am I changing? The independent variable? Well, for this experiment, I would have to change the amount of sunlight. And then what I would measure would be the growth of the plant. So that is the dependent. Okay, so the growth of the plant depends on the amount of sunlight. And the one more thing we need to point out is that if we're going to do this investigation, we actually have to be careful about how much we change at once. So we are interested in the effect of the amount of sunlight. But what if we also did the experiment and we used different types of plants, or we watered the plants differently, right? If we change a bunch of things at once, when we go to measure the growth of the plant, we won't know if what we're seeing was caused by the change in sunlight or was it caused by a change in some of those other things. So in an experiment, you change one thing and keep everything else the same. So for this example, we would not want to change the type of plant, for example. So run your experiment on the same types of plants. Amount of water that we give the plants, type of soil that they're growing in, right? We could go on and on about the things. These are all the things that we need to keep the same if we're going to be able to determine if our dependent variable was caused by the independent variable. So these don't change things. We call these the controls. So control is another type of variable. It's the variable that you don't change. These are the controls. So in an experiment, change one variable at a time, or you won't understand your outcome. You won't be able to figure out what your numbers mean. And again, the things that you don't change are called the controls. All right, excellent.